Andrei, I would be lying to you if I told you that I didn't really care as a scientist about an afterlife. I do. I do care about it. I think about it for myself, my family, everyone. Um, and as I look at least my own traditions, Judeo-Christian scriptures, I don't find an immortal soul, and I don't find that in brain science.
Yeah.
But I do find in the scriptures talk of a resurrection,
Yeah.
that God will raise the dead, whatever that may mean.
Yeah.
And so if I have any hope, that's the only hope. Then I think about how could that possibly happen?
Mm-hmm.
I think of a million different ways that doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the metaphysics, if you will, of a resurrection?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think this is really tough. And I think for those of us who endorse some version of materialism, who reject the idea of a kind of immortal soul, this is a unique challenge. So I think there are different options on the table, and they end up being dissatisfying in different ways. So, and to tell you the truth, I don't really know which one is right.
Well,
But,
I would hope not.
yeah.
Or else I was talking to somebody or something that was not particularly human.
Right, right. Well, nor would I say I'm actually committed to any particular view.
Okay.
That may even be a better way of putting it. On the one hand, some people say that persons might be reconstituted in an afterlife, and by which they mean something like this. They'll say that persons are constituted by their bodies. They're not identical with their bodies. They end up being, if you will, something a little bit more than their bodies. When you've got a body that's configured in the right sort of way, you now have a person. And similarly, they're going to say that that person, when upon death, is going to be resurrected in another location, but only reconstituted by some different stuff. Now, there's a question about what exactly is going to have to be continuous in that sort of case. And one option, again, that's going to be endorsed by people who endorse this kind of position, and I'm thinking here specifically of Lynn Rudder Baker, they're going to say it's going to be something like the person's ability for self-conscious reflection. So, if you will, that sort of first-person perspective that the person has, that's ongoing. That doesn't change. And the fact that you actually have that first-person perspective emerging someplace else, reconstituted by some kind of a glorified body, is going to be enough for resurrection. I think a difficulty for this kind of view is this. This view has the difficulty of addressing cases of persons who are going to be, let's say, for instance, you have someone who has some sort of severe impairment of some sort, a severe mental impairment. And now the person goes from being in that particular state on this side of death, and then they end up being, they have their post-mortem resurrection body, and this is a glorified body, and it's a completely different person, if you will, it seems to me. It seems that, in fact, that person's first-person perspective even changes radically in light of the fact that, in this case, the mental impairments have disappeared. At least I'm guessing, at least I'd hope that's the case, right, in heaven. So I think the difficulty that those sorts of theories face is going to be one of personal identity, right? How is it that you can actually account for the person post-mortem who's been resurrected? How is it that that person is identical with, right, the person who died even moments before, or however long before? So I think that's a particular difficulty for that sort of view. Another option for materialists is going to be one where what you've got is you've got persons being, if you will, four-dimensional space-time worms. And on this kind of a position, what you've got is either some sort of a gap in the worm, or the worm sort of, part of it sort of emerges elsewhere, and it's heaven or whatever. The difficulty for that kind of view is this. It's easy for me to make sense of objects being four-dimensional in our physical universe.
Progressing through time.
Progressing through time. And for instance, right now I'm speaking to a spatio-temporal part, right, of that spatio-temporal worm, right, that is Robert. But now we go to heaven. Now, heaven I thought was supposed to be someplace that's really quite different. And so I think that becomes particularly, I think that's what's going to be what's going to be especially difficult for those views that take persons to be four-dimensional worms, space-time worms, and then the worm just sort of emerges elsewhere, having changed significantly, but nonetheless it's the same worm, it's just somewhere else. So I think both of these sorts of views, both of which I find attractive for different reasons, have these difficulties, And so I think the challenge, of course, then for people who reject an immaterial soul is how it is we're supposed to be thinking about
Making this
persons.
happen.
Yeah, how can this happen? So I share your concern, but it might be that what people are going to have to give up on is personal identity, perhaps, or they might have to say that heaven is, part of our universe, or someplace else is a different universe. So.
Yeah, or some would say, therefore, you need an immortal soul.
Or you need an immortal soul. Right.
Yeah,
Of course.
or if you're rejecting that the whole system collapses because it just doesn't work.
Right.
I mean, those are the things we have to face.
Right. I think that's exactly right.
So either the whole system is false. That's one.
Yeah.
Either the next thing is you need an immortal soul, and if you're willing, you want to keep the system, and you don't want an immortal soul. Then you're in the quandary we talked about of having some sort of a mechanism for a resurrection to maintain the personality. But what you're saying is that maybe you don't maintain that individual personality. That's an option. I don't like that option, but
I think that's what you're forced with. I think if you're going to go that route, that's to say, if you go the Constitution route that I mentioned at the beginning.
So what are the implications of that?
I think the implications of it are going to be that you don't end up having the same person post-mortem.
So what good is it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What you might have is somebody
is going to be reconstituted and somebody else's first-person experience?
Yeah, right.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. I think it ends up being more problematic. I think it becomes especially problematic in these sorts of cases.
That kind of God is like a sadist.
Yeah,
giving me the illusion that I'm going to come back in some form and it's going to be something else.
Yeah, I think in one sense what you might say though is you've got
I'd
you may
throw
not have
out
personal
God.
identity.
I'd throw out God before I would accept that.
Yeah, well, I think what you might say is you've lost personal identity, but you might have something like minimal survival going on there. And I think I think that's interesting. I think there's an interesting question about whether or not that's enough. And it's not clear to me that that's really so much a metaphysical question. It seems like it's more of a question about value and what it is we value in terms of our survival or personal identity. Is it that important? And if it's not, why not? And if it is, well, why is it so important? So I really think it's a really significant challenge, though.